A waitress quietly pays for a soldier's meal. The next day, tanks blocked the street, making her heart pound. That morning, the street was eerily still, a hush that felt like the world was waiting for something important. Jolie hurried along, her brown boots splashing through puddles from the night's rain. Her scarf fluttered in the breeze, and a familiar aroma of coffee drifted toward her. As she turned the last corner of the cafe, she barely registered the quiet before a deep, earth-shaking rumble shattered it. It wasn't thunder. It was heavier, deliberate metal scraping against asphalt. A tank, an actual military tank, rolling down Main Street as if it had emerged from a memory too vivid to be real. It was the sort of sight that didn't belong in a small-town morning. Jolie stopped in her tracks. People spilled out of shops, eyes wide, voices hushed. Cars sat crooked at the curb, windows down, passengers gaping in shock. Phones were raised. Someone whispered, "Is this a drill?" Another asked, "Did something happen overseas?" But Jolie said nothing. Her eyes were glued to the hatch as it slowly creaked open. A figure rose from the tank, and Jolie's breath caught. He stood tall, outlined against the gray sky. His uniform was standard issue but marked by travel and dust, his posture unchanged, shoulders back, purposeful. The name patch on his chest said it all. Hart. She hadn't spoken in weeks, but her soul echoed it now. Aiden. He climbed down, boots landing softly on the pavement. As he approached, the crowd's murmurs faded. There was no music, no noise, just the sound of his steps and the intensity in his eyes. He stopped in front of her. No words, no ceremony, just him. Carefully, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, its edges worn from being handled. He offered it to her. Jolie took it with trembling hands, never looking away from him. She unfolded it gently. One line was written there. "I couldn't hear your voice that day, but I felt everything you said." The world seemed to tilt, and her knees nearly buckled. She looked up at him. He raised one hand, palm open, fingers apart, and moved in a gentle, fluid gesture. "Thank you." She recognized the sign instantly. Basic ASL. But there was nothing ordinary about the way he signed it. Nothing casual about the way he looked at her, as if she'd been the only voice he'd heard during months of silence. She couldn't reply, not in words. Her throat was tight, her heart pounding, so she just nodded and smiled, her lips trembling. Then, without a sound, he reached behind him and produced something Elsie's sunflower, a little wilted but still bright and brave. He held it out with both hands, as if it were an offering. She accepted it gently, her fingers brushing his. Neither moved, neither needed to. Then, as quietly as he'd arrived, he turned away. He walked back to the tank, climbed up, and paused to look at her one last time. Then the hatch closed, the engine roared, and the tank rolled down Main Street, drawing everyone's attention, but no one watched more closely than Jolie, who stood frozen, holding a flower and a note. Around her, life resumed. Children tugged at sleeves. Teenagers shared videos on their phones. A shopkeeper wiped away tears, but Jolie remained still, because something huge had shifted inside her. She'd known it from the first time he slid that napkin across the cafe table. She'd known he was different, and now he'd told her without a microphone, a speech, or even his voice that she mattered, that her kindness hadn't disappeared into silence, that love doesn't always come with flowers or music. Sometimes it arrives on a tank, sometimes with a note and a sunflower, and sometimes when you least expect it, it comes back to you whole. 3 weeks earlier, the cafe was softly buzzing in the early evening. Outside, rain tapped gently on the windows, streaking the glass. The smell of chili and cornbread filled the air, clinging to sweaters and boots. Jolie moved gracefully among the tables, apron loose, hair in a messy braid. It had been a long shift, but nothing out of the ordinary until the bell rang, and she looked up to see him, a man, late 20s in military green. His boots were soaked, jacket buttoned tight, cap pulled low. He entered slowly, as if the world had taken too much from him, and sat in the farthest booth, back to the wall. Jolie waited a moment before approaching. When she did, she smiled and began her usual greeting, but he quietly raised a hand and slid a folded note across the table. She hesitated, then read, "I'm deaf. I prefer to write, if that's okay." Jolie's smile softened. She nodded, pulled out a pen, and scribbled a response on her notepad. "Absolutely. Take your time. Let me know what you'd like." A small smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He wrote carefully and handed the note back. "Grilled cheese and tomato soup, please, if that's still on the menu." She wrote back, "It's always on the menu." "Good choice." She turned away, catching a look she couldn't quite define. Not sadness, not fear, not detachment. Hope, cautious and quiet. 15 minutes later, she brought his food, setting it gently before him. He nodded in thanks. She didn't linger, just smiled and returned to the counter. The evening continued as usual. Customers came and went. Regulars chatted. Occasionally, she glanced at the back booth. He ate slowly, savoring each bite as if trying to remember what warmth felt like. But when he reached for his wallet, something changed. He paused. Jolie watched as he checked his pockets, then opened his wallet and stared at it, jaw tight. She could almost feel his anxiety, the way his hand hovered over the worn leather. He half stood, looking at her, embarrassment clear in his posture. She approached quietly. Before he could say or write anything, she took the bill and tore it in half. He stared, stunned. Jolie smiled softly. "Dinner's on me," she said gently, knowing he might not hear. Still, her voice was steady and kind. She pointed to her chest. "My choice." He didn't argue or pretend. He just nodded, slowly and sincerely. Then, taking a pen from his jacket, he wrote a message on a napkin and handed it to her with both hands. "Thank you for not asking why, just for understanding." She accepted it as if it were something precious. After he left, she folded the napkin and placed it in her apron. That night at home, she opened her journal and carefully taped the napkin onto a blank page. There was no date or title, only that single sentence. She stared at it for longer than she meant to, feeling something in those words wrap around her heart unexpectedly. It felt like being truly seen. It felt familiar. She didn't know his name or where he was from, but something inside her said this wouldn't be the last time she saw him, and that thought made her feel a little less alone. The nights grew colder as the sky darkened and the streetlights flickered on a long main street. Aiden always returned at the same time, always to the same booth. He never spoke and never stayed long. He would order by passing her a slip of paper, eat slowly, sometimes leave a quiet note, and slip away before the dinner crowd arrived. Jolie became accustomed to his routine. She even started to look forward to it, even though their conversations never went beyond the basics. "Tomato soup again," she'd write. "Comfort food," he'd reply. "Anything sweet tonight?" "Your handwriting's enough." They didn't need much. The silences between them were never awkward. They were steady and warm, like the quiet between old friends or something waiting to grow. One night, the cafe closed later than usual. A burst pipe had kept her cleaning the back kitchen long after the last customer had left. By the time she locked up and stepped outside, the streets were nearly empty, glistening with drizzle under the orange streetlights. She took her usual shortcut behind the buildings. It felt familiar, safe, but that night, something was different. She heard footsteps behind her as she passed the first dumpster. They were quick and close. Suddenly, a hand grabbed her shoulder. She barely saw the mayonnaise flash of a hood, a sneer, a hand grabbing her bag. She tried to scream, but fear choked her voice. She fought back, kicking and struggling, but he was stronger. He shoved her against the wall, her head hitting the bricks and leaving her dazed. She gasped, searching for help that wasn't there until it was. A shadow moved swiftly, a figure out of nowhere. Aiden. He acted without hesitation, his military instinct sharp. A single blow sent the attacker stumbling. Another move disarmed him. In seconds, the man was on the ground, groaning and scrambling away. Aiden let him go. Jolie collapsed to the pavement, shaking, her hands scraped and knees bruised. Her breath came in short, rapid bursts. Aiden knelt in front of her, reaching a steady hand toward her face, but not touching, waiting. She looked at him, his eyes, They weren't angry or frantic. They were full of light, alert, and focused. She realized he hadn't heard her scream. He hadn't needed to. For a split second, she looked over her shoulder as she fought, her eyes pleading into the night. And somehow, Aiden had seen her. He pulled a notepad from his coat, his hands quick and practiced. He turned it toward her. "I didn't hear you, but I saw you, and I'll always see you." Jolie covered her mouth with her hand. Tears fell, hot and silent, not just from fear, but from the safety that followed. The safety that comes from someone who chooses to stay. Aiden helped her up, gentle and slow. He didn't lead or rush her. He simply walked beside her, all the way back to the cafe. They didn't speak, not with words, but she'd never felt more heard. That night, long after she'd bandaged her knees and washed the blood from her hands, Jolie sat in bed, rereading the note he'd given her. She didn't tape it into her journal like the others. She folded it carefully, slipped it into her wallet, and kept it with her because, for the first time, she understood something new. His world wasn't silent. It was attentive, deliberate, and sincere. And she didn't want to just watch from the outside anymore. She wanted to step into his world, to learn his language, to understand his way of listening. So before turning off the light, Jolie opened her laptop. She searched for ASL classes nearby. The first night she signed to him, her hands trembled. It wasn't fear or doubt, but something deeper, like standing at the edge of a new language and a new beginning. Her fingers felt clumsy and unsure, but her heart was steady. This moment mattered. She had spent 2 weeks practicing late into the night. After her shifts, Jolie would sit on her old couch, watching grainy ASL videos, repeating the same signs over and over. She practiced in the reflection of her toaster, microwave, even the window. When city lights weren't too bright, she signed to her cat. She finger-spelled her grocery lists. She wrote down phrases in her journal, underlining the ones she hoped would make him smile. She didn't want to just nod at him anymore. She didn't want to rely on napkins and hope he could read the kindness in her eyes. She wanted to speak to him in his language. That night, the cafe was dim and quiet. Most chairs were empty, the dinner crowd gone. The music had stopped hours ago, leaving only the hum of the ceiling light and espresso machine. At exactly 8:03 p.m., as always, Aiden walked in. Jolie saw him through the glass before the bell above the door rang. His boots were damp from the drizzle. His cap was tucked into his coat. His posture, straight as always, was unmistakable. He sat by the window, placed a folded note on the table, and waited. Jolie approached, dry her hands on a towel tucked into her apron, her heart beating deep and steady. He gestured to the note as usual, but she didn't reach for it. She stood in front of him, shoulders relaxed, breath steady, and then she signed. "Good evening, Aiden." His eyes widened slightly. There was a pause, not of discomfort, but surprise. His brow furrowed, then softened. After a moment, he smiled. Not the polite half-smile he usually wore, but a true, wide smile like a door opening, like sunlight after clouds. He pulled out his notepad, hesitated, then wrote, "You learn this?" Jolie nodded and signed again, slower. "I wanted to talk to you in your world." His pen stopped mid-sentence. His fingers paused. He looked at her, not as if he was studying her, but as if he was trying to remember this moment. He wrote again. No one's ever done that. He looked away, then back, and wrote a longer message. "I used to talk a lot in the military. Orders, jokes, radios. Then the explosion happened. After that, everything was quiet, including me." He tapped the paper gently. "I didn't lose my voice, just a reason to use it." Jolie sat across from him, tracing the wood grain of the table to steady herself. She didn't speak or write. She raised her hands again. "It's okay if you don't want to speak. I'm learning to listen differently." He blinked, his eyes shimmering, but the tears didn't fall. Slowly, he put down the notepad, closed it, and for the first time, raised his hands. Not perfectly, not smoothly, but with intention. "Thank you for meeting me here." Jolie smiled, not realizing her eyes had begun to shine. That night, they didn't need menus, notepads, or Wi-Fi. They just sat in that booth under the soft light, speaking with their hands and hearts. Aiden showed her how to sign coffee, home, and storm. Jolie taught him hope, safe, and stay. Their fingers moved slowly, like two people learning to waltz in the quiet. No one interrupted. No one needed to. In that corner of the cafe, in a language without sound, they told each other everything that mattered. And for the first time since Aiden had come home, silence didn't feel empty. It felt whole. It felt like love. Evenings at the cafe didn't truly end when the lights dimmed and chairs were stacked. For Jolie and Aiden, the real moments began after the bustle faded, when the coffee pots cooled and the world grew quiet. That was their time, no music, no hurry, just the two of them. Aiden would settle into his usual booth. Jolie would bring 2 mugs of tea, already knowing how he liked it. They had developed a silent understanding, a rhythm shaped by patience, attentive glances, and the gentle certainty of hands that had learned to communicate. At first, their exchanges were simple. They'd talk about their days, comment on the soup, or laugh about the couple who left a crayon drawing as a tip. But gradually, the invisible walls between them began to disappear. One night, Aiden signed with hesitant honesty. He admitted he'd never really shared this with anyone, not even his family. When he returned home after losing his hearing, he thought he could adapt to the silence. What hurt more, though, was not being truly heard. People no longer spoke to him as himself. Instead, they talked at him, not with him. He paused, then confessed that outside the military, he felt invisible, as if he only mattered in uniform. Jolie responded with gentle signs, assuring him he was never just background to her, not here. Aiden's expression softened. Then, one rainy evening as thunder flickered outside, Jolie finally asked what she'd wondered for a while. Did he ever miss speaking? He looked at her for a long moment before nodding. Yes, he missed it, but even more, he missed being spoken to. He leaned back, gazing out the window, and shared a dream he once had, a place for people like him. Not a clinic or therapy, but a quiet space where silence was normal and no one pitted him for not talking. Jolie stood, pointed to a cozy nook in the cafe, and suggested they create such a space, a silent booth for communication without words. Aiden's surprise turned to a genuine, full smile. That night, they stayed late, sketching ideas for sign cards, conversation prompts, and a journal for silent messages. Jolie promised to paint the sign herself. Before leaving, Aiden scribbled a note on a napkin and slid it to her. He never thought anyone would want to truly hear him until her. Jolie tucked the note into her journal, close to her heart. That weekend, they hung a wooden sign in the cafe's back corner. Silent booth. Every day, someone new would sit there, sometimes Aiden with a sketchbook, sometimes a mother and her deaf son, sometimes just Jolie waiting with coffee. That corner always brimmed with presence, meaning, and a love that grew stronger in silence. One morning, Jolie found an invitation tucked beneath the sugar jar, a Department of Veterans Affairs ceremony. Aiden's note beside it was simple: "They want me to speak." I said no. When she asked why, he signed that he didn't sound like others and didn't want pity. Jolie replied maybe they wanted to hear his heart, not just his voice. He didn't answer, but he kept the invitation. The ceremony was held in the old community hall, filled with veterans, families, and reporters. Jolie stood with Aiden before it began, adjusting his jacket and her dress. He looked calm, but she knew he was nervous. She signed, "Ready?" He nodded. When Aiden's name was called, applause filled the room. Jolie joined him on stage, wearing a sign that read, "Interpreter." Aiden didn't use the microphone. Instead, he signed his speech while Jolie voiced it for the crowd. He thanked them for the honor, admitting he never expected to be there, not because he didn't value it, but because he hadn't believed he belonged. He spoke about losing more than hearing. He lost connection, conversation, and for a while, himself. He paused, then said that someone had finally seen him as whole, not broken or silent, just quieter. Looking at Jolie, he said she'd shown him that silence could be powerful and that hearts could speak without words. Today, he spoke for everyone who had ever felt unheard, not because they couldn't speak, but because no one listened. The room was silent. Then hands lifted in a wave of silent applause, palms open, fingers fluttering in ASL. Jolie saw tears and gratitude in the crowd. Afterward, She found Aiden crouched beside a young boy with a hearing aid. Signing quickly, the boy finished, saying he wanted to be like Aiden, someone who didn't need to speak to be heard. Aiden replied, "You already are like me. You are enough as you are." The boy hugged him, and in that moment, Aiden didn't need a stage. He'd said everything that mattered. When Aiden left the military for the last time, the silence was different, not the emptiness of battlefields or grief, but final, meaningful quiet. He handed in his gear, shook hands, and completed his discharge. Though officially free, he felt something unresolved, a sense of unfinished purpose. A logistics officer asked about his transport. Aiden simply pointed to a tank in the motor pool. The next morning, the ground trembled as the tank rolled down Main Street. People stopped, watched, and wondered. No one could look away. Jolie had just finished locking up the cafe when she felt a deep vibration in the air, a sound that reached her heart before her mind could process it. She turned toward the street and froze in place. She instantly recognized a figure rising from the tank's hatch. That familiar stance, that quiet confidence. It was Aiden. The tank eased to a stop in front of the cafe, its engine rumbling softly, air hissing from vents. The hatch opened fully and Aiden climbed down, his steps steady and deliberate. His uniform was perfectly pressed, his expression calm, and his eyes shone with determination she couldn't quite define. He approached her, not reaching for a notepad or signing for her to wait. Instead, he simply took a folded piece of paper from inside his coat and handed it to her with both hands. Jolie carefully unfolded it. There was just one sentence. "This is the first order I've ever given myself. Go back. Find her." She looked up at him. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Then Aiden's hands moved slowly and purposefully. He signed that he hadn't chosen the tank to draw attention, but because he needed the biggest, boldest way to say something he'd never been able to say aloud before. "Thank you." Jolie didn't cry immediately. Instead, she stepped forward, her hands steady, her gaze unwavering. She signed back. "You didn't need a tank. You already had me." Then she closed the distance between them, wrapping her arms around him, holding him tightly as if she were his anchor. In a soft whisper near his chest, she said, "I've been waiting for you to come home." And at last, he had not from war, but from the silence that had kept him away. The cafe glowed warmly like a beacon in the snowy night. Golden lights twined around the windows and beams, casting a gentle starlight glow. Outside, snowflakes drifted down, covering the street in a soft, silent blanket. The world was hushed, but inside, the silence was intentional. Every table was full. Friends, families, children with wide eyes, and elders who smiled at the unfamiliar language of hands. But no one raised their voice. That was the rule. It was Silent Night, the first special event Jolie and Aiden hosted together since opening the Silent Booth a night for the deaf community, and anyone willing to listen differently. Carved on the tables displayed simple ASL phrases. Volunteers wore pins that read, "I'm learning." There was no music, only gentle vibrations of floor, the warmth of candlelight, and conversations expressed through hands, glances, and quiet breaths. In the back corner, the Silent Booth was specially decorated. A white cloth covered the table, 2 mugs of cider steamed, and a single candle flickered between them. Above, the sign still read, "Where silence is not empty but full." Jolie was by the register, helping a little girl sign, "It's nice to meet you." When she felt a gentle touch on her shoulder, she turned. Aiden stood there. He looked calm, but his hands trembled a little. He signed carefully, asking her to come with him. She nodded without hesitation. He took her hand and led her across the quiet room. As they passed, people watched with gentle attention, sensing something important was happening. They reached the Silent Booth. He pulled out her chair, and she sat down. He took the seat across from her. For a moment, neither spoke. The candlelight danced between them, casting golden shadows. Then Aiden reached out, gently taking her hand in both of his. He signed that he needed to say something not with his hands, but with his heart. He touched his chest and then his throat. Jolie's heart skipped. She understood. He signed again, asking if she wanted to hear his voice, that this would be the first time, and he wanted it to be for her. Tears filled her eyes. She nodded and waited. Aiden took a deep breath. His shoulders tensed, his jaw tightened, and his lips parted. At first, only breath came. Then, Jolie. The word was rough, uneven, but real. His voice was shaky, like the first crack of ice in spring, fragile but alive. Jolie covered her mouth in awe. She had never heard his voice before. He continued, each word careful, as if learning to speak again. I forgot how to use my voice, but you made me want to try. His eyes stayed locked on hers. They didn't need anything else. I'm speaking because of you. Then, still holding her hand, he knelt down. One hand stayed in hers. With the other, he took a small box from his coat and opened it. Inside was a simple silver ring, engraved with one word. Heard. Aiden looked up at her and whispered, almost soundless, will you marry me? The cafe fell silent. Every eye, every heart leaned into the moment. Jolie didn't cry at first. She looked at the man who had survived so much, who had returned not just from war but from silence, who had found the courage to speak again for her. She raised her hands. Yes, I've always heard you, even when you said nothing. He exhaled a shaky, relieved laugh. Years of walls crumbled in that single breath. She stood and pulled him up. This time, when she embraced him, she didn't let go. The cafe erupted in applause, not with noise, but with hundreds of hands fluttering in the air, the language of joy. Snow continued to fall outside, but inside, something beautiful had blossomed, not from sound, but from a promise that in the quietest places, you're never alone. Sometimes, the strongest voices are those that reach across silence. Jolie didn't need words to understand Aiden, and Aiden didn't need sound to show his love. In a world that often forgets to listen, their story reminds us that love doesn't need volume, just presence, courage, and a heart willing to stay.